Hi, we're here to talk about Metal Without Borders, as you might have noticed by the t-shirt. So Metal Without Borders came about a few years ago and to tie in with Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival. And as far as we know, we're the only group locally, nationally and internationally. We haven't come across another group of Metal Without Borders, not yet. And we have two main aims. One is to bring awareness of the whole concept of Without Borders, and the other is, and human rights, and the other is to fundraise, and that's what we've been doing. So Brendan and I organised the first gig a few years ago, and in terms of awareness, we've worked over the years with numerous bands, and obviously our target audience. And like every group, there's people who are politically aware and people who aren't. And what we've been doing is raising that awareness. So whenever we've had an event, somebody always gets on stage, usually me, and talks about, whatever we're raising money for, which is usually LE Solidarity and After 18s. LE Solidarity works nationally and internationally and locally with asylum seekers and refugees, and After 18s is for that age group. And Brendan's going to say a bit about what metal music is and how we're going forward.
Yeah, just so for anyone that doesn't know what metal music is, I guess I've got a quick overview so you can have a quick understanding so you're on the same page. So heavy metal is a music genre that thrives on its subculture. It's typified by loud, fast music and usually has aggressive vocals. So the music can be complex, fast and uncompromising, or it can be simple and straightforward. But the one thing that brings all of the community together is a free spirit and an openness to try different things. Many people in the metal community face a certain amount of prejudice due to how they look. They may have long hair, they may have piercings, they wear a lot of black, and there's a lot of negative connotations within the music. A lot of people think they're Satan worshipping, crazy or violent, when in fact quite usually the opposite's true. Many people who see metal from an outside perspective can see it as uninviting, rude, dangerous, when in fact a lot of people from the community are kind, warm and compassionate people. Through my involvement in the community, I first heard about many things like veganism, protest groups and many different types of initiatives to save the planet and different kinds of people. I've also met many people from around the world while taking part in the community. They've always been willing to help, take people in and make sure people are okay and usually give them somewhere to stay or anything like that. On one occasion, I myself had two bands stay in my house. Whenever they had a show in London, one band from Paris and one band from New York they'd got all the way to London, and when they arrived in London they'd been told that the venue they were going to be playing in had actually been double booked and they now had nowhere to play and they had nowhere to stay and they'd nothing to do. So they went to Facebook and just put out a general message asking if anyone knew of any shows they could join in on. I replied to their message. I couldn't get them anywhere to play, but I offered them somewhere to stay. So they came all the way up from London, all the way to Leicester, and in the end they ended up playing in my band's practice room to me and three of my friends, which to me was an excellent night because I quite like the bands. But so I ended up taking them in and they ended up staying in my house and I gave them somewhere to stay and something to eat. So this is the kind of sense of community that I find that you can find within the metal community. Everyone's kind of there for each other, whether they're strangers or not. So the next thing is, where is Metal Without Borders going? So next year we're planning on having our biggest event ever. We want to build on what we've done before. We want to build on the amount of money that we've raised, and we also want to build awareness as an organisation. So we have for the next year. Obviously this year we had planned a gig, but it's unfortunately fallen through. And instead of putting on something less impressive, we decided to just focus on next year. We've already planned a kick-off meeting in January with, I believe there's 5 or 6 of us turning up for the meeting, and we're planning on a plan for next year to have everything ready for next year's gig next December. So we want ways to grow as an organisation, so we're hoping to get even bigger acts than we have before, so that would involve internationally signed musicians. And we plan on creating a logo and some other graphics to help us create our own branding, so we have our own design. We also plan on starting ways of taking in people, getting more people from the wider Leicester metal community involved, and maybe from even further afield from out the UK. The other main discussion point in our meeting will be the show in December. As we want it to be bigger, we will start need plan earlier. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm just going to finish off, tell you a little story basically about heavy metal in Iraq. And in fact, next year we will be at the festival. We will be showing the film Heavy Metal in Baghdad. You can actually see it on YouTube. But also, I'll just give you a little brief glimpse into it, which is that in 2002 there was a band called Kuda, which means Black Scorpion, and they were the only heavy metal band in Iraq, and they wanted to play a gig in Baghdad. So they had to get permission to do this, and they had to sing a song about Saddam Hussein, saying what a wonderful bloke he was. A few years later, in 2005, we no longer have Saddam Hussein, but we have troops, and we have barbed wire around places, and they were still together. There was an American crew kind of keeping in touch with them. And so they had the opportunity to play a gig in a hotel in Baghdad. They had to finish by 7 because that's when the curfew was. All their equipment had to be searched. They would love to look like Brendan with long hair and wear t-shirts like this, but of course they're not allowed. So they did manage to do their gig. The electricity went halfway through, but they managed to get it going again. And then they decided, well, later on that year, their practice room was bombed, so all their equipment was lost. And so in 2006, they decided to leave Iraq and go somewhere safer. So they went to Syria. So, in fact, the film ends there, and you're thinking, what has happened to them? Luckily, we have Wikipedia, and what you find out is that while they're in, the film also ends by saying that 6 months after the film, they had to sell all their new equipment again to pay their rent. So they talk about being refugees in Syria and how hard it is. Regardless of whether they're metal or not, just being a refugee in Syria was hard for them. Anyway, the film crew decided to help them the following year escape to Turkey and then to America. So luckily they went to America before we have our present president, and they were able to stay there. And in fact, if you look them up, they're quite a well-known Iraqi-American band now. And the highlight when they got to America was meeting James Hetfield, who is the lead singer in this band. So that is a lovely ending to that story, but I'd just like to read you the words of one of their songs when they were playing in Iraq, and it is this. Years ago, they created a new way to kill innocent people. The children, the elders, and the women. Bombs dropped like rain from the sky. The rivers are filled with the blood of the innocent. Thank you.